Welcome to Secure AI Now, a podcast hosted by the Alliance for Secure AI. I'm your host, Brendan Steinhauser, CEO of the Alliance for Secure AI. On today's show, we talked to Sunny, Gandhi, and Adam Billen of Encode AI. We talked about the organization, its goals, its mission, and its recent leadership in the fight over the AI Moratorium. Sunny and Adam, along with a lot of their allies, did some amazing work to prevent the AI Moratorium from being included in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Let's see what they had to say. Well, first I'll do a quick introduction. So we have Sunny Gandhi, who is the Vice President of Political Affairs at Encode AI, and Adam Billen, Vice President of Public Policy at Encode AI. And we've got to know you guys the last couple of months now and started to work together on a bunch of issues related to AI policy, safety, security. You guys really have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in Congress and in the states. But first I wanted to ask you, before we jump into all of that, how did you each get involved in this? What attracted you to this field? I think that's something that people would really be interested in hearing. So Adam, if I could, I'll start with you. What got you interested in this space and how did you get involved?
Yeah, sure. So I studied data science and political science in undergrad. And so I had always kind of been wanting to combine these things in some way, some form. And so I worked on political campaigns for a bit. I did kind of applied political data science for a little bit, some polling stuff. And then I had a summer where I started reading a bit about AI and got very concerned very quickly the deeper I went. And I had some friends kind of in the social media, youth regulation space, and they knew, our founder, President Steinhauser. So I got introduced to her through that, kind of going into my senior year when I was interning at a polling shop, and then started doing stuff senior year. And then when Sunny and I graduated, decided to do this full time instead of the stuff we were originally planning to.
Awesome. Sunny, how about you? What got you interested?
My background was in the technical side. And so I was a computer science student and was really into AI on the technical side of things. And so did a bunch of work sort of understanding the technology and working at a couple different places on what different sort of like technical capabilities could look like. And I feel like I got a bit of an inside view a couple of years early. Like I remember, everyone knew about ChatGPT when it launched in November 2022, but I remember getting some early access to versions that weren't as great and really freaking out about, I can't believe this text is real. Like I remember just a day where I was sitting with my dad and it was like writing out poems in 2020. And it was pretty wild that was possible back then. And so that was sort of always in the back of my head. But I feel like I started to have conversations with some of the people that I was working with and some of fellow students or people at the companies I was interning at and things like that. And everyone's always talking about the fact that the tech is progressing, but I felt like no one was really talking about what are the implications of this? What are we going to do about this? How is this going to matter? And I definitely was coming off the same sort of, I know how corrosive social media has become and how many problems it's caused. And I feel like a lot of those conversations didn't happen. And now they're happening, years and years later. And so finally we're starting to gain some awareness, but this feels bigger and like it could cause more problems. And so wanted to kind of get ahead of having those conversations. And I feel like part of the other problem was there was this sort of constant joke that, what are politicians and people in DC going to do about this? Is, the classic thing of a senator holds up a phone and is like, how do I fix this, Mr. Zuckerberg? And it's like, I don't know, that's not our phone, it's not our company. And I feel like, so there was that attitude. And so I wanted to sort of come in and try to bridge that gap where there are a lot of people on the technical side that could be useful. But then there's people in DC that need to like hear from them. And so I, eventually found my way to Encode and have been working on the policy governance side since.
Awesome. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about Encode. What are some of the issues you guys work on broadly? Like, what's your kind of place in this space that sets you guys apart? I guess, Adam, you can take that first, I guess.
Sure, yeah. So I think, the basic context is that we're a youth-led org, and so we had been around for, 4 or 5 years doing sort of purely public education, workshops, talking to people about the technology. And then really in the last year or two, switched hard kind of towards the advocacy policy side, because I think we realized that suddenly people were taking this more seriously and realized kind of the larger implications. And there was a moment where policymakers were kind of waking up, and we wanted to kind of activate on that. And so we kind of had a background in kind of AI harms already happening in the present, things like deepfakes, things like that. And then I think have also been one of the few orgs that also kind of works on the longer term questions, the safety questions, the security questions that I think normally are siloed to groups that sort of purely care about those things. And so I think part of what's unique about our group is that we try to work on kind of both sides of that spectrum and have been doing a lot of coalition building and trying to get either side of that coin to care about the other. And I think the moratorium, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is one example where those worlds really united around something shared that affected both of them. And I think we're hopeful that people will have more moments like that where they realize that all of this affects all of the issues all of us care about, and we need to kind of be united and consistent in our positions.
I'm just going to add to that by saying I feel like this shows in some of the things that we've worked on, like concretely, you know, we have done work all the way from working with Senator Cruz on the Take It Down Act, which would put the first kind of federal guardrails on non-consensual deepfake nude imagery. And then we've also done work on, we advocated for the first guardrails on the use of AI in nuclear weapon systems that passed late last year in the defense authorization. And we've also worked on kind of what frontier AI regulation should look like and done some of that work in states. And so I think we've, you know, tried to manage of, let's try to attack a bunch of these issues at the same time and see where you can build people where everyone's concerned about all these things. There are people that talk more about one versus the other, but I think broadly, everyone is very fairly concerned about the use of AI in nuclear weapon systems. So you should not silo that to just one particular group of people. And same thing with people are concerned about the proliferation of deepfakes and what that means for society when you just cannot believe any of the things that you see on the internet, or you can't believe if a politician is really giving a speech. And so these are, you know, things that all feed into each other, and they've been sort of artificially siloed out into different groups. And a lot of our work has been to try to work on all these things at the same time because we think they're all important, but also to help people recognize that you should work together across, even if it's not traditionally what you've been interested in working on.
I think that, Sonny, that's really interesting. I want to come back to what you said about the moratorium as well. We're gonna dive in, but I think that's really important that people understand, and that like what we talk about here is the many intersections that AI and AGI and like all of this stuff that's happening. It intersects, you know, our day to day, but also stuff down the line in the future as well. And so I think this is a very interesting intersection as well. And you guys have been involved in that fight for a long time. So, you know, diving into the most recent battle, because this is certainly going to be a war. What was, when you guys first started hearing whispers and rumblings about the moratorium and about the preemption, what was like the first thing you guys did? What was the reaction?
Yeah, the first thing we did was we organized one of these open letters off the bat. I think it came out maybe like a Monday morning or late on a Sunday night, and there was a hearing for the budget bill on Tuesday. And so we had like 24, maybe 36 hours to get something turned around. And so we worked with a couple of organizations, Young People's Alliance, Fair Play for Kids, and Common Sense, which are two orgs that traditionally focus on sort of kids issues. And when we realized that the way the moratorium was written in the provision, it would have been so broad that it really wouldn't have just captured AI legislation, but also social media bills, data privacy bills, antitrust legislation, anything you could think of. We realized very quickly that a lot of these miniature coalitions could really come together behind this. And so we immediately started talking to some of those other people that had also seen it and were concerned. And so we flipped around this open letter with, I think, 50 or 60 orgs by the Tuesday hearing, and some members held up that letter during that hearing. And that was sort of the first shot. And then I think all the sort of coalition building we've done in the past month and a half has been building off of that.
Yeah, it seems like the coalition was key, like bringing people in who were motivated by different things, who maybe they're not AI specialists or they're not always focused on AI policy, but this hit them directly. They were concerned about the ramifications of AI on something they cared about. Can you kind of speak to that and how maybe that's a model for the future for other issues? You know, tying this back together to what Sonny was talking about. I mean, I think people are starting to understand that AI is going to impact literally everything, right? Every every element of human society, every element of the economy. You can go on and talk about so many different policy areas, but like, what's the lesson learned on the coalition building side of things for you guys?
I think the main one is to remember that everyone is thinking and talking about this, even if they don't literally work in AI policy. They care about this. They're thinking about this. They're worried about how AI is going to impact their issue area or their job or their family and their kids. And everyone is their own sort of unique stakeholder on this, which is why I think we were able to do such a large amount of coalition building very quickly. Like, I think one of the best examples of this is one of the orgs that we worked with very closely on the Take It Down Act was the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, RAIN, which is a huge organization that does a lot of sexual violence prevention work. And we also worked with them a lot on the moratorium because they are really concerned about about CSAM laws being overturned by the moratorium. They're really concerned about AI deepfakes, like NCII. They're really concerned about a host of issues that they already work on that AI just accelerates like crazy. And that is RAIN is not the organization that comes to mind when you think we need to fight against the AI moratorium. Who should we call up? And yet they were incredibly helpful, and they put their heart and soul into also fighting on this, on their with the people that they have and the connections they have, and the partner orgs that they work with. And I feel like that is sort of the lesson to take away, that the traditional thinking of you should be siloed within your tech policy circles, that should be obliterated, and people should focus on just, if there is an organization out there that has an issue that they care about, then they also probably care about AI, just because it's going to flip it.
That's a super interesting perspective, and I think that's I want to talk more about the coalition building as well, because I think that was remarkable to see, and it obviously took a lot of time. I do want to level set real quick. Can you guys tell us a little bit about why state level policy versus federal preemption is important? Why was this such an important fight?
I'm happy to talk about this. This is my favorite topic ever. I just think Senator Blackburn said it in her 4:30 a.m. speech, but Congress isn't lacking for ideas. Washington D.C. has like the most think tanks of any capital across the world that gives a bunch of ideas of what we can do to solve for all sorts of issues. Like, Congress has, if you just go on congress.gov and look up the bills relating to AI, there are dozens and dozens of them, and more of them are proposed all the time. And there are many, many more ideas floating out there. And these are good bills. Like, they are bills that have good substance and should move and could actually do real good things to prevent harms. But just the dynamics of Congress being polarized and gridlocked and captured by interests makes it so hard to move anything across the finish line that it just doesn't make sense to concentrate all the firepower at the federal level. There are many states that have started to recognize this. I mean, all but a couple of states have laws on artificial intelligence. Like, when the first sort of non-consensual deepfake imagery came out, basically all states at least moved to legislate on it and moved to clarify their CSAM laws and moved to clarify that you could sue and that this was illegal. And Congress eventually did that. They did it, but they did it almost a year and a half, 2 years after states started to first act on this. And honestly, that was a rare example of a time Congress actually did something. There are many, many more issues where states have moved to act on them, but Congress hasn't. And it's just because states are more nimble and they can move more quickly and they can deal with these harms. And they're also just genuinely a lot more answerable to their constituents, and so are more willing to kind of tackle these issues. And so I think it's important to protect those states' rights, especially with the technology that is moving so quickly, because you want to make sure there is already a sort of like apathy people have towards the government being able to move quickly and solve for harms that emerging technology creates. And the best sort of bulwark against that we have is states, while Congress just remains completely polarized and gridlocked.
Yeah. And I think it's easy for that to feel abstract, but with the deepfake example, that's a year and a half, that's 2 years where there were hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of victims that would have had zero protections when their incidents happened. before the Take It Down Act passed. And federal protections are very important, but there are things that states just literally uniquely can do that Congress cannot do. In the deepfake context, local authorities are often the ones that actually have the resources to pursue cases. DOJ does not have the power, the manpower, the resources to actually pursue all of the cases that are going to be reported and sent to them. And so there are unique things that states can do that Congress simply can't do. And this is just like the fundamental structure of our country. This is how everything was built for 250 years. And when you break that structure, there are things you break in the fundamental nature of just how the entire country and political system works that are maybe not clear at face value. And I think there's also a perception that somehow in the states you can like snap your fingers and bills are passed. But I think Sunny and I can say that as people try to pass bills in the states, it is really, really difficult. And they are deliberative bodies that will say no to you and carve things up. And if you go back and actually look at the laws that states have passed, many of them are about relatively, I don't want to say simple issues like deepfakes, but relatively non-controversial ones. And the really kind of meaty, complex policy questions around things like frontier regulation are still being worked out and have in no way been solved. And Congress is frankly going to need the experimentation and the laboratory of the states to get to a policy solution in the end that's good. And if we don't have that chance to kick things around, we're never going to get to a good federal policy.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think one of the arguments that industry made, big tech in particular, was that they didn't want to face, 50 different laws on the same topic, or potentially, 500 different laws, which I think is kind of ridiculous. Even though 1,000 bills have been introduced on AI around the country, a very small number of bills actually move it through the process and pass the House or the Senate, much less get signed into law. And I also think to me, it's disingenuous because every other industry in the country has the same challenge, right? If you're a healthcare company, health insurance company, if you're a pharmaceutical company, if you're in finance, if you're Walmart, if you're Costco, if you're, any business doing business in this country, you're dealing with different local and state rules and regulations, laws, policies and procedures, different personalities. That's part of your, the cost of doing business. Unfortunately for them, I guess, but it's a way to provide protections to local communities and states. And so, states are laboratories of democracy. We are a federalist system. We're not a centralized system where everything comes out of DC. I think that's been a good thing. Sometimes states get it wrong. And we've told people who are on the other side of this fight, look, we admit some states are probably going to do some things that probably aren't what we want them to do.
Yeah.
But people have to allow other states to come up with those good ideas that then we can show that, hey, this is going to work better. Let's do that instead of this. And to your point earlier, it's not like Congress has been moving lightning fast to pass legislation. We've seen some good things, and we've seen some other potentially good pieces of legislation out there on export controls, location verification of chips, for example. So hopefully we'll see some more of that. But I think this is kind of a misnomer that, for some, the big tech can't handle compliance or legal costs or whatever, understanding these different laws in these states. But would you guys agree with that, or have any other thoughts on that?
I mean, 100% do agree with that. And also, I think there's somehow, Adam touched on this, but I just do want to reiterate that there's this attitude that a state will just release a bill and then magically it's signed into law and there's no protections against, like the thing you learn in any legislature is there are 1 trillion veto points and just one narrow path to success. And it is very, very easy to kill legislation, even if you aren't, multi-trillion-dollar companies. And so I think I just never have understood this idea that, yes, there are 1,000 bills introduced, and most of those bills die because they're bad ideas, or they have choke points, or the legislature doesn't have the will to get them over. And there's this attitude that for some reason states don't have the normal democratic processes that Congress does, and I just completely do not agree with that at all. And think that a lot of these states are also quite cognizant of the fact that they are playing a role in being at the frontier of policy, and are also trying to balance the complex considerations of, we want to work with industry, we don't want to just kill off all the tech companies, but we also need to provide protections. And if you talk to legislators and lawmakers, they're very aware of these realities and are always kind of thinking about how to balance this. And I think it's kind of frankly insulting to them and their legislature to say that they are unable and cannot understand these things and cannot figure out, the right paths forward to deal with this.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they said. I mean, you had 40 state AGs, you had a majority of Republican governors, you had 260 state legislators, 130 Ds, 130 Rs, all coming out and telling Congress that this is a mistake. And that kind of universal backlash from the states, it might seem like from this fight that that's a regular thing, but that is rare. That is not a thing that is supposed to happen, even in previous fights on other tech issues around preemption, like data privacy. There was not as universal a backlash to the data privacy preemption laws that Congress tried to pass. And to your point, Brendan, about industries complying with this already, that includes many of the tech companies that are going to have to comply with AI laws. They're already dealing with many different state laws, and they're still making billions of dollars. God bless them, and they will continue to do that even when these state AI laws exist.
Yeah, definitely. I want to ask you, kind of going back to the strategy and the tactics a little bit. Again, I know when you're in these kind of fights, you're groggy and you're trying to just move things forward and do everything you can to engage. But did you feel like there was a turning point in this effort? There may have been multiple, but talk about that. Like, when did you see things start to shift in your favor?
I feel like there were 20. I think the most notable one was over this past weekend when there was kind of a tentative compromise that fell apart in the Senate. And we thought at that point, when that had been accepted, that we were perhaps done. And I think what turned that around is that, one, we already had this massive coalition that was upset about this, and we had people paying really close attention. And part of the strategy when people are trying to, frankly, sneak a provision like this through is to kind of do it in the dead of night or in a quiet way, or sneak some good language in that gets what they're trying to accomplish without making it seem like that's what they're doing. And I think that's what we saw with this provision over the weekend that purported to exempt a lot of the issues that sort of miniature parts, bubbles of the coalition cared about, like kid safety, by adding this list of things that were included in the set of generally applicable laws under the exceptions in the provision. But they had added this thing that said, and does not place an undue burden or restriction on AI systems. And that and chunk, if we hadn't spotted that quickly, which I think credit goes to the Institute for Law and AI people, who had, I think, probably a blog post legal analysis out within an hour of the provision releasing, we very well could have lost right then and there. And so that felt like a huge turning point. And when we were able to turn around, I think that was one of the later nights we had where that had come out very late on Saturday or Sunday. And Sunny and I stayed up all night assembling this new letter of 150 orgs saying, no, this provision still is not good enough. And I think when we kept everyone together at that point, after this provision that had purported to solve the issues we had been addressing, when everyone stayed united, that felt really powerful to me, and the biggest sort of symbol of what we had built.
I want to add that we have done many open letters on many different topics. I don't think we have ever turned around a letter in 12 hours with 150 organizations from a Sunday night to a Monday 12:30 p.m. deadline. And I think part of that is, yes, we burned the midnight oil. We talked to a lot of people. We probably called some people while they were sleeping. And sure, that I don't think we've really done that because we've never been on that tight of a deadline. But I think the fact that so many people were willing to, normally when an org signs onto a letter, there's 7 people that need to approve something. And there's this crazy bureaucratic process and whatever. And everyone wants to check a million things and add their own edits and say, I want this, I need this and removed to it or whatever, And I feel like it really speaks to how strong the coalition was in support of stripping this out, that people they just decided, let's forget all the normal processes. Let's forget all the normal stuff. We just need to get our stuff out there and make this happen. And I think that alone just kind of speaks to how big of a deal this was for a lot of people, that this happened so quickly. And I think when that came out, and then slowly, we started to hear that people were recognizing inside the building that, maybe the language doesn't exactly do what it needs to do and stuff like that. I think, that's when we started to really feel the tide shifting. And then when Senator Blackburn decided that she was no longer going to go on the compromise, I think that's when we were like, okay, this is it. This is, I think it was like 7 p.m. or something, and then it's like, okay, it's time to whip some votes for the next month.
Yeah, and I think the other extraordinary part of that is that, I mean, people were so fired up that our letter before that with whatever 130 or 140 orgs took us like a week or something, and then the second letter in 12 hours had more orgs in like 1/10 of the time. I mean, people were really, really fired up, and that's also, you know, that weekend was around the point that a lot of the parents started writing letters as well, and we had this letter from 850 different parents around the country. I think people had this sense of like having someone try to pull one under them or something, and that is really when the tide shifted hard. And I think no one expected. I mean, we had a lot of texts Saturday night that were like, "Oh, you know, we're done. They won. We lost." And when we were able to turn that around, that was very cool.
Yeah, that was impeccable timing. So Adam, you touched on this a little bit with Law AI, but can you share a little bit about the key groups or individuals that really like came together to help, add to the fire and like add to the energy to make this happen?
Yeah, I think the parents were a huge one. I mean, you know, we've worked with a lot of the parents who have, you know, frankly lost their kids to social media, more recently to AI companions, or whose kids have been harmed, and having those people fired up and excited was really powerful. And I think it's easy to take that for granted, but those are people that are like actively grieving right now. And when those people are mad and trying to do things, that is powerful, and the members listen to that. In terms of sort of civil society, I think Americans for Responsible Innovation was a huge one. I think one of the beautiful things about this fight is that we had this sort of inside-outside game happening at the same time, where, you know, we and a lot of other groups were talking to staffers and members inside the building, and then at the same time you had this big advocacy wave, and ARI worked a lot with us on the 260 state letter, and then also had people talking to folks inside the building. I think also the National Center for Sexual Exploitation, which is another group we got very close with during the Take It Down fight, was a huge ally. Common Sense Media, Fair Play, some of the other youth-led tech groups like Design It For Us and Young People's Alliance. Yeah, I think those are the ones that come to mind, but I'm sure I'm forgetting many, Sonny.
I would add Heritage was definitely
quite
outspoken about this, and was, you know, they put out multiple op-eds and were going around talking to members, and, you know, just raising up a huge chunk of people that I think otherwise wouldn't have spoken out or really thought about this that much. So shout out to them as well. But I think that does cover the main groups.
One thing that was just striking was the right-left alliance on this. And we were watching this on social media for weeks leading up to this and encouraging it and cheering everybody who was coming up. It was really fascinating to watch one by one people come out, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes maybe we had a sense of it. But, you know, did you see what Congressman so-and-so tweeted? Did you see what this, you know, conservative talk host tweeted? Did you see what this progressive activist tweeted? And really pretty fascinating. And what do you guys think about just the prospects for, I hate to say recreating that, but like, what do you think about the prospects for a bipartisan coalition on these types of issues going forward?
I mean, one of the things that I love about working on AI policy is that I just genuinely don't think it is clearly partisan. You know, I think there are some things that some people have very specific niche issue areas that certain camps feel more strongly about. But I think by and large, AI policy does not clearly fall into the traditional camps. And I think you totally see this on the people speaking out against the moratorium were ranging from AOC to Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, it does not get a wider coalition than that. And I think this is played out for us multiple times before. I mean, we worked on SB 1047, which was a bill to regulate frontier AI models in California last year. And you had, I always joke that the supporters ranged from Mark Ruffalo to Elon Musk. And it just, these are the kind of coalitions that you constantly get when you work on these things, because I think, again, it touches so many parts of society that you just don't get the normal pro-business, pro-regulation divides. There are a lot of people concerned about a lot of different things. I think there's many Democrats that are kind of reticent to regulate on this. And I think there's many Republicans that are very excited to regulate on this. Like it just does not fall clearly, and I don't really see that changing anytime soon. And so I feel quite excited about kind of maintaining that coalition and honestly even expanding this out and sort of encompassing, it really does feel like there is a contingent of sort of big tech and Silicon Valley adjacent people, and then it's like them versus everyone else almost.
Literally everyone else.
That's actually what it feels like. And so I feel quite excited about kind of maintaining that. And I think as AI becomes a bigger and bigger deal and starts percolate even more throughout society, I just imagine that this kind of alliance becomes much stronger rather than weakens.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think to be blunt, industry maybe secured their fate with this a little bit. I think the social media fight is often pointed to as an analogy for AI. We would not be in the position, in the sort of partisan alignment, in the civil society alignment, in the everyday people alignment that we are if many of the same companies building AI were not the ones that had developed and sort of released social media without any guardrails. And I think people really understand that where we failed on social media for a decade, and frankly, Congress is still failing on social media, still has passed nothing. States are still the only reason that kids have protections online. That's why the parents and the kids groups were so angry about this. We just would not be in the place that we are in any way. But people get that we are, what industry is threatening is another decade for AI that we've experienced for the last decade on social media.
Literally another decade.
Literally exactly another decade, exactly 10 years. It is extremely ironic, and no one wants that.
So that's interesting that you say that. Since there is no moratorium, no preemption, what does that mean going forward, both positively and potential upcoming fights?
I mean, I think it means that states will continue to try to understand the technology and try to do what they can to protect against the harms. I know that we work in a couple different states, and I know the attitude from state legislators has always been, we would love for Congress to do things on this, but we just totally understand that this is not going to happen, and so we have to take the lead. And it's unfortunate because we have a million other things that we would rather focus on, but we are going to keep focusing. We're going to keep spending energy on this. And I think now that this fight has happened, I think if anything, they're going to be more energized as I can't believe you guys don't do anything and then try to take away our ability to do things when we have been working so hard to try to understand this and have a really good vision of what kind of model of regulation that we want to set. And so I think that's just going to re-energize states to care even more about this issue and do a lot more. I think that the preemption fight is not over. This is the first battle of what I think is going to be a really long war, and there are going to be, proposals are going to be made. Maybe they're going to be standalone legislation. Maybe they're going to try to go into more budget fights. This is probably not our last reconciliation, so maybe it happens on the next one. Maybe it goes into CR. That one, who knows? But the concept is not over. I mean, Chairman Guthrie has already been on the record yesterday. I mean, preemption was killed 2 days ago, and yesterday he was on the record saying that he would like to do this, and he is still going to look at all avenues that he can to try to make this happen. And so I don't think this fight is going anywhere, and I think it's really gearing up to, this is going to be a long thing that we have to keep protecting states to do, or we have to encourage Congress to not just say, here's a moratorium, but here is the thing that we're doing. And then now that we've done this, we are going to preempt states to do this, which, sounds great. That would be awesome. I just don't personally feel quite optimistic about the possibility of that happening anytime soon.
Yeah. And to put a T in that, I think that what has changed is that this became a constituent issue. This is not just random, ivory tower people in DC that care about this. Offices are getting called about this. Parents are going to the Hill and calling their Congress members about this. And beyond that, they're going to their state reps and their state senators and their governors and their AGs. And there is pressure on all of those parties to move on that. And this pressure is only going to increase. And when you talk to regular people about this technology, they are really, really worried, and they understand where we are headed. This is not something that you need a PhD in AI to get. You just have to look at where we've been and think about where we might go. People get that instinctually. And until Congress shows that they're responding to that and doing something real, that pressure is not going to let up.
Yeah, very, very well said. Couldn't agree more. And I really have faith in the American people on this one. I think whether it's conversations we have with people or you look at the public opinion data, and they're with us on not only this, but a lot of other issues regarding AI policy. So I'm somewhat optimistic that if we can just continue to have the conversation with people and validate their concerns and engage them in this effort, we're gonna have a bright future and a lot more wins like this. So I want to thank you guys for everything that you do. Thank you for being leaders on this battle and the next battle, and then the one after that. It's really an honor to work with you guys, and look forward to your work in the future. So, Sonny Gandhi, Adam Billen, thank you guys very much. Peyton Hornberger, our communications director at the Alliance for Secure AI, and I'm Brendan Steinhauser, the CEO of the Alliance. And thank you everyone for watching, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Brendan.